Okay, folks.
Rabbi, you had
Yes.
shared with me Shir Yaakov Fights 23. Would you like to play in with that?
Yes, and did you have the place where he starts? So remember, we introduced you last year to Shir Yaakov Fight, who started with us to write a composition every day for the Psalms. So in somewhere around April, last year, he got up to Psalm 23. So this is his version of Psalm 23. He wrote an original, and he's wonderful. And I really recommend people follow him on his Facebook page or YouTube. He's done it he's really a very, so this is, we heard yesterday, a Hasidic traditional composer's setting, Ben Zion Shenker, and here is a very contemporary, written during COVID.
I love that melody so much. I was thinking about, it came in Adar this month, or this year. I hadn't put words to it. Those words fit quite nicely. But like I said at the beginning, I haven't written yet anything for today, day 23, which is a little intimidating because it is probably the most famous psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, that one. So since I love that melody, I'm going to see how it sounds or feels to sing this whole Tehillah to this melody. Me is more than David. Adonai rohi lo echsar binon deshe yarbitzeni al mei menuchot yinaleni nafshi yeshover yancheni b'manglet tzedek yancheni b'manglet tzedek Leman Shemo Gam Kilech Begeit Salmavet Lo Irara Ki Ata Imadi Umishantecha Hema Yenachamoni Taroch Lefanai Shulchan Neged Tzorai Ishanta Bashem Ben Roshi Kosi Evayam Ach Tov V'Chesed Il Defuni Kol Yimei Chayai I, da, 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 I, da, 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 I, da, da, I, da, da,
Thank you. Thank you, Harold, for putting him up. So you notice his was very different, very soothing, very calming, tried to get to that place of this particular Psalm, Psalm 23. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the Fisher interpretation and translation, and we'll go back to Hebrew again next week because I want to keep things a little bit also so you start to see some different ways that people respond to the language, but we'll keep going back to the Hebrew. But Harold, let me grab my Fisher. If Harold, if you could put up Fisher.
Okay, going up.
Has everybody gotten your tickets for Sunday's concert? If you haven't gotten, you must get it. It's going to be fantastic. Okay, do you have somebody to read Psalm 23 as interpreted by Norman Fisher?
All right. Ira R. raised his hand.
And since Ira has already spoken to him personally, Ira is the appropriate person to read this.
Thank you. You are my shepherd, I am content. You lead me to rest in the sweet grasses, to lie down by the quiet waters, and I am refreshed. You lead me down the right path, the path that unwinds in the pattern of your name. And even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are with me, comforting me with your rod and your staff, showing me each step. You prepare a table for me in the midst of my adversity and moisten my head with oil. Surely my cup is overflowing, and goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life. And in the long days beyond, I will always live within your house.
So we can have this an open conversation. Raise your hand in response. Let's have a conversation. What do you see that Fisher is doing, and how do you experience this? How is Fisher leaving the literalness of the Hebrew? How is he referring to or talking about God, for instance? Thoughts?
Lori Spear.
I just wanted, I guess, the same follow-up on what the rabbi was saying. Who is the you that he's talking to? If it's not a supreme God, is it a person?
So the first thing you notice that there's that Fisher, you'll know, as we point out, doesn't go line for line, removes the numbers. It's not exactly the 6 verses, but it's pretty close. And then, of course, Fisher removes Yud He Vav He, or the word for God, but does have, as Lori pointed out, the you. But remember, I pointed out in the original Hebrew, the first 3 verses are about God, or about the power, or about that source of strength. And Fisher immediately changes it into the you, goes from the third to the second person immediately, right? So do you see that difference? Does everybody recognize that? That's one of the things that many interpreters do. And you'll see we even did that in the CBST Hebrew to avoid using the gendered Hebrew. But I think, personally, I think it loses a little bit of the strength of the psalm that starts from a place of being outside, so to speak, to being very direct. But I do love this very much. You are my shepherd. And that's always a big question for Fisher. And I think we read the Fisher's introduction where he discusses what he means by God and how he experiences that. But it's, and I like very much, you are my shepherd. Lo echsar. So instead of the negative, I lack for nothing. Lo echsar. I have no, it's not the negative. It's I am not lacking. Fisher gives us what's the positive form of I am not lacking. And I find this very moving. Content. How many of us can say we're content? That experience of experiencing content. And I think that's a very moving translation of it or interpretation by saying I am content rather than I'm lacking nothing. Okay, other thoughts or reactions to this? Just have to close the door. Hold on.
Well, yes, there are people in chat. Let's see. Okay. Judy Hollander, would you like to say in person what you've said in chat?
Yes, I was like just listening but not thinking, and I sort of got into it. By the last sentence, I was totally moved by this
Yeah.
without any intellectual thing. And that last sentence, I don't know, there was something, and it could have been how Ira read it. Thank you, Ira. But I am like, I speechless. However, I'm not speechless, but I felt for that moment speechless.
Yep, I think it's a very beautiful interpretation. I agree with you, Judy. I find it very moving too.
Monica Raymond also had a comment in chat.
Monica?
Monica, would you like to?
I said the path that unwinds in the pattern of your name.
I love that too.
That feels totally original, like nothing we've seen in any of the other translations. So.
Yes, I think it's, again, he's trying to get to something that's spiritually meaningful. And this is always the question I'm asking you, all of us, to do when you encounter the Psalm. How would you say that line in a way that's spiritually meaningful to you? And I think he's created something really beautiful.
And Cantor Nimi.
Oh, I was just going to say, I love how he connects that, when I heard Bina Ot, I hear Na'eh in it, that like pleasantness. And it seems to me that that's kind of like a tack that he's taking here of this, like the sweetness of the pastures, of the meadows, of the grass.
Beautiful.
And to Hans, Sherry Dratfield.
I was struck by, normally you see the thing of my adversity, in the midst of my adversity. Usually it's with my enemies, and you have the vision of David surrounded by enemies and some sort of battle. And this makes it much more personal and much more universal, I think. So much more relatable to me.
Beautiful. And remember, the Hebrew word sorai is sarot, also are troubles. It's not just troublemakers, so to speak. It also could be troubles. And I find that, beautiful. In the midst of my adversity, I agree.
Sarah Siegel.
My wife Pat always says, once we're dead, we're dead. And I feel, and I'm trying to get ready for that. But when I see, like Judy, the last line, it's so comforting, the idea that, and the long days beyond, I'm not going to be homeless. My only home isn't going to be that grave. It's going to be, in God's house. I just love that. So +1, Judy.
It is beautiful.
And Sarah Sill asks why the U is not capitalized in the middle of the line if it's referring to God.
Isn't that interesting how he does this? And did we do this as a class to study his comment, or we did that about
sovereignty?
Sovereignty. So maybe next week we should look at his discussion of theology and God, because he does discuss that, and I'd rather let him speak for himself. So maybe we'll do that, Harold. You and I will talk about that, because it's important.
And Sue Mears says, could you go back to what you said about the Hebrew having third person and then second person, but this translation starting out directly in the second person?
Okay, so the original psalm in the Hebrew is talking about God. So that would be the he, she person. But this is talking directly to God, the you. So that in the original, what?
Are there any of the English translations where it's also in the third person? Because I feel like I'm reading them all.
Well, Sue, if you saw, I sent something out this morning that has 8 translations compared, And this
Okay.
is one of the things that leapt out to me as I did
Yes.
it and compared 8 translations of the same line, that this seemed to be one of the biggest changes that the translators made. They just didn't like to keep to Adonai is my shepherd. They wanted to go right into addressing God. So if you have a minute to take a look at that sheet.
And
it's
we'll
a
talk
really
more about
interesting
that next week. We'll look at Harold sheets next week. I just want folks to get more used to seeing some of them. But yeah, a lot, the traditional ones for sure stick to that. As I said at CBST, we did something which I don't usually like to do, but I felt there was an obstacle for the English prayer, the language, which is how to refer to and keep and deal with the gender issue. So we switched it also. So the, but theologically, I like this. I like it better when you see the transformation. It's a transformative moment when you go from pasuk gimel from the 3rd verse into the 4th verse.
And Jack Neiman gets to one of the cruxes of the text, which is Ishanti b'shem and roshi, moisten my head with oil. Is that like being anointed by God in some way? The translation of that word is anointed.
There's a lot of discussion of that, for sure. But it was done at other times as well in the ancient Near East. It wasn't only done to be anointed. A king was anointed. That's where the difference between whether it's Jesus or just kings. In Israelite tradition, all kings were anointed. And remember, we had the great conversation about what's her name, Queen Elizabeth, and the scene of her, right. That fabulous but I don't think that this is, of course, some would read this as David actually speaking and speaking about himself being anointed, but clearly it has a sense of abundance and, abundance.
Alter has a good note on that. It's not the word used for anointing in the other, like the word.
Correct.
For Moshiach. Okay.
The word for anointed that's usually used is the same word for Messiah, which is why Christianity refers to all the anointed one as meaning Jesus, which in Jewish theology, that's not true at all. It's just the act of anointing, which happened in all different rituals of the ancient Near East. What else does altar say? Let me grab my altar too. I don't have that in front of me.
Go to the altar.
I'm going to the altar. Yes, Saul?
So yesterday when you spoke about how the rod and staff are the tools of the shepherd, I mean, I had never thought of it before that way. I always thought of it as punishment sticks. And here Fisher says, not only comforting me with your rod and staff, but you show me the way. And that is totally a different view. That nice, here I am in the valley of the shadow of death, but you're going to show me the way.
Yeah. A lot more comforting than the idea of being punished by, and I think the problem is because spoil the child. What is it? Spare the rod, spoil the child. And so that word itself in English has a certain association for us. Thank you, Saul. That's great.
Linda Solomon?
Yes. What struck me was something that I've been using myself. The next to the last line in the piece is, he says, all the days of my life and in the long days beyond. And that's something I've been writing in cards now for birthdays and anniversaries, etc. That sense of beyond this year, beyond this week, beyond this month. And that always struck me as very hopeful. And here he writes his last sentence is, I will always live within your house. That's just so comforting.
Yes. Thank you. Beautiful.
Ira?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the question of why that one word you for you are with me isn't capitalized. And maybe I'm taking too narrow a viewpoint here, but I think it's simply that it's not the first word of the line, because all of the other first words of each line are capitalized. And that's where all those other yous appear,
That is a very good point, Ira.
I doubt that, you know, he capitalized the word to, where it's to lie down by the quiet waters.
Correct.
It were in the beginning of the poem. That's how I'm looking at it, not some great philosophical interpretation.
I think that's really great. I do think it's worth reading about his discussion about God, so we understand better how he's thinking about that. But actually, now that Ira points it out, it's pretty clear there's a lot of U's that are not capitalized, that if it were a traditional God U in a traditional translator, which Fisher is not, you would capitalize all of them. There are many that, good point, Ira, thank you. I never noticed that.
Betsy.
Takes a good editor to point these things out. Thank you, Ira.
Just wanted to go back to the conversation about showing me each step. There's something, even saying it, every time I read that, I have this kind of quickening almost in my heart. It's just so loving and caring and personal in a way. It changes everything in terms of, to me, what this psalm is about. And it even gives me, my dad is 97 and a half, and still around. And yet, you know, I feel like it's also this sense when I see him and I walk with him, it's literally each step is such effort. And it also, you know, to think that God is always, for me, God is always with us, and literally each step of movement, I find it almost overwhelming in terms of what it touches me.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you.
Barry Gillis.
I wanted to kind of comment on your rod and your staff, because Dorina sent an article to us yesterday. Did you guys look at it? Where they describe exactly how these tools work and how the shepherd uses these tools to manage the animals, and basically showing me each step is exactly what the rod and the staff are for, because it kind of keeps the shepherd away from the animals' critical distance, and at the same time manages them.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sherry. Very thoughtful. Thank you.
Michael Goldstein.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, we hear you. We hear you.
We hear you, Michael.
I'm going to give you my free translation of The Shadow of Death. Although I feel profound negativity, goodness counters it with tools of the pastor. Feeding me in front of my internal and external enemies, goodness anoints me, my being is fulfilled.
Wow, Michael, I love it. I can't wait to hear your whole psalm.
Thank you.
I like that very much, of seeing the valley of the shadow of death as the negativity that exists around us. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, El Bat Chava had a note on the Hebrew meaning of Ishanta, Shanti.
So it comes from the root deshen, and it could, in modern Hebrew, it's used as the word fertilizer when you fertilize a land or a grass.
Rabbi, were you looking up the note in altar for that?
Yeah, I've got the altar note. And maybe we'll even look at altar if we have no more comments on Fisher. Do we have time to go to altar?
Of course we do.
So what I wanted to do by going to Fisher before altar and before doing more traditional is to see how it can be completely kind of blown open, and maybe that's the wrong phrase, but you see how creative his reading is with this. Okay, so let's look at altar for a moment.
I would just say that looking at this, of all of the Fishers, this one hews pretty closely to the text. There are places where he goes much farther afield. All right, let's go to altar then.
We're going to the book for Robert Alter. And remember, again, Robert Alter is interested in saying, using English to be poetic, but to try and get as close as possible to what he imagines, or, I mean, he's a scholar, how he understands biblical Hebrew. So again, Norman Fisher does not know Hebrew. He's not functioning from the Hebrew. He's going for the spiritual meaning, looking at an English translation. So Alter is looking at the Hebrew, and his whole goal is to get as close as possible with his deep knowledge. He's a scholar, and he keeps to the verse numbers, and he does as much. Levy does it also, but Levy's willing to leave as much as possible. So Alter really wants to show the structure and the rhythm and the sense of the poetic part of the Psalms. So he also talks about it being a David psalm. So somebody want to read the Alter? Let's read it all out loud just so we can hear it.
Yeah, if I could get a reader, hand up. Sarah Sloan.
A David psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Could you pull it down? This is as far as it shows on the page.
Hold on just one second. Let me try it again. Because I see the whole, is that any better?
Yep, that's
yeah.
Okay.
A David psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In grass meadows he makes me lie down. By quiet waters guides me. My life he brings back. He leads me on a pathway of justice for his name's sake. Though I walk in the vale of death's shadow, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, it is they who console me. You set out a table before me in the face of my foes. You moisten my head with oil, my cup overflows. Let but goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord. The first thing that struck me was how
finish that verse for many
long days.
Yeah.
The thing that struck me is how masculine this is.
So that Alter's not interested in playing with the gender. He's interested in getting as close to the Hebrew text as possible. When he makes changes, he makes a decision to use an English word or rhythm of words that will somehow reflect the rhythm or the sound in the Hebrew, because he wants it to reflect that. Alter is very dense. When you start really getting into studying Alter, and I once did this for a couple of things, for something else I was doing, you realize his genius at kind of making these changes. His commentary is important, and it goes even deeper than that. So first of all, we notice the verses are there exactly, and he's calling it a David psalm, which we've seen before, meaning it could be written by anybody in this pattern or tradition. And I love this. What I love about Alter is how quickly you can see the biblical parallelism. The phrases, when there are two phrases in one sentence, or sometimes even three. So yes, he's using his will always retain the literal nature of the gender in Hebrew. He's not going to play with that at all. But that's why in our class, we're doing all these different ones so you can experience it. So let's look at it. First of all, he will always use the word Lord when the Hebrew word Yud He Vav He is being used, and it'll always be in those small caps. That's how he'll always indicate which name for God is being used. And okay, so let's look at the beginning. So how does he, you'll notice that how does the Nafshi Yeshovev, my life he brings back. He leads me on pathways of justice for his name's sake. So again, here we see the first three psukim. The verses are talking about God. My life he brings back. He leads me on pathways of justice for his name's sake. In grass meadows, he makes me lie down. By quiet water guides me. And then verse 4, we see the transformation. Though I walk in the vale of death's shadow, I fear no harm, for you are with me. So he goes from he to you. That's the transformation that he maintains. Your rod and your staff, it is they that console me. You set out a table before me in the face of my foes. Also could be internal or external. And you moisten my head with oil, my cup overflows. Let but goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for many long days. Okay, any other comments about reading now that you saw Fisher. You've been working on the Hebrew. Any other thoughts about the altar?
Linda Solomon.
I'm finding that his phrase here, your rod and your staff, it is they that console me. I'm finding that very uncomfortable. That's not something that I would expect from an inanimate object, a rod or a staff, to console me.
Linda, Monica Raymond put in a very interesting note here. She said the shepherd uses the rod and staff to keep the flock together, to keep the sheep away from dangerous places, and to guide them home at the end of a day of grazing. So in a shepherding context,
right, they're the tools of the trade
for keeping the sheep safe.
Right. Exactly. You have to recognize that. What this is referring to is the shepherd from the verse 1.
Well, yeah, I did.
They're the representations, in other words, of how we're being guided and taken care of.
Yeah, it's the word console, I think, that disturbed me there. If he had used the word, it is they that keep me safe, or it is they that guide me, it would be
So for
different.
you, yeah, so he's
But the word console disturbs.
So Yinachamuni is the Hebrew word, which can mean console or comfort. It absolutely can. So he is not going far out on a limb to use the word console. But I get for you that's not meaningful, but it's completely understandable how he gets there from Yinachamuni.
Okay.
Actually, do you know, for instance, the Hebrew name Nachum?
Yes.
That's this word. That's this word. It means a comforter or a comfort.
And Nechama too.
Yes, Nechama. Exactly. These are so it's a very, actually, this shoresh is pretty clear in it doesn't mean you have to use the word console. But he's not going far afield to use that. Comfort, console. These are pretty standard for this word.
Okay, thank you.
Carol and Barbara are in their car. I can see that. How are the dogs?
I'm driving.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll keep the connection. I just wanted to point out the line next to the last line in the first paragraph. He leads me on pathways of justice for his namesake, because of course I'm left-handed, and I'm getting really tired of the last translation was, he shows me the right way, and I felt like screaming, what about the left way? so anyway, but pathways of justice. So then it's for everyone. Everyone's included. And, that was important. Yeah, that's all I had right now. It's so hard to concentrate in the car. Cheryl's driving, I'm not driving, but I just wanted to be here. So.
Of course, wonderful to have you. Drive safely.
Thank you so much. Thank you. See you Monday. I'll be on in my house.
Okay, good. Drive safely.
Okay.
Shabbat shalom. Okay.
Judy Frank.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I used to recite the psalm to myself when I was a teenager, like 19 or 20, coming home alone on the subway. And I lived in Brooklyn on Parkside Avenue, right opposite Prospect Park. And I would be petrified because there was an entrance to the park right at the corner of Ocean and Parkside. And I would take the subway and I walked down that block. And I was so scared, even though I told my mother, oh, I'm not scared at all. But I would recite Psalm 23 to comfort me and believe that maybe some protection. But I guess because I was never bothered. But so I really love this psalm, and I don't mind the maleness. At least it didn't bother me when I was saying it. But yeah, I just love it to bits. So I don't know.
Wonderful. And which translation would you recite it in Hebrew or with a particular translation?
We did the King James version. Cool. So we're
going to look at that after we've looked at all of these, because it's how can you not? And it's a really.
I think back, and not only did we say prayers, the Psalms in the King James version, but we also had to memorize all the Christmas songs, which when I know them better than Donald.
Well, I've told you my story that I got to be the little drummer boy because I wouldn't use any words for Jesus. And, I went to public school, but we did all those Christmas songs. So I got to be the drummer boy that did pa-rum pum pum pum. That was my part in all the Christmas pageants we did in public school. Pa-rum pum pum pum. That was my role.
Love it.
Okay.
So Sarah Siegel says that she says, I think it was her bat mitzvah Haftarah portion is Nachamu Nachamu.
Exact, great, perfect, exactly. Nachamu Nachamu.
Which shows up in Handel's Messiah as comfort ye my people.
Right.
Harriet or Ruth?
Yes, this is Ruth. I wanted to comment on the verse 6, the way it's translated by Alter in this, and with his footnote, which I happen to have the book, he says, he makes it clear that the viewpoint of the poem is in and of the here and now, and is in no way eschatological. And I want to point out that
where is that from? Where are you reading?
From Alter's footnote. And I wanted to contrast that with the end of Fisher's, where he's
so interesting. What a good point you're making. Wow.
So in the long days beyond, he's really talking about some point beyond our lives.
Ruth, that's fantastic. I've never thought about that before. And absolutely, yeah. Alter is making the claim that it's not the end of days or for all time. And Fisher goes there because Fisher's looking at it in a very different way. Another great example of how Fisher's bringing his spirituality and making it meaningful, regardless of what Alter says the original might have meant.
I like Fisher's point of view better myself, but
yep. Well, I just want you to know it all. It doesn't mean I want you to agree with it all, but just learning this gives depth. And then when you choose a Fisher, you're choosing it out of a deeper knowledge of why it means so much more to you. I will keep saying this. I don't have an agenda for you to like one thing. I want you to learn more so that the depth of how you make a choice or how you make a decision about what it means has that level of richness.
So
wonderful, thank you.
Can you see on the screen where I went down to the Fisher footnotes or no?
Yeah, okay. I can, yep.
So here's the note on 5 that we were discussing.
Yeah, so this concluding phrase catches up the reference to all the days of my life in the preceding line. It does not mean forever. The viewpoint of the poem is in and of the here and now, and is no way eschatological. Eschatological. I know that word. That is so funny. The speaker hopes for a happy fate all his born days and prays for the good fortune to abide in the Lord's sanctuary, a place of security and harmony with the divine, all or at least most of those days, meaning the days of his actual life. But very, very interesting. That's great picking that up, Ruth. Thank you.
Ellen A. Ellen, unmute yourself.
Sorry, I was muted. My home was a completely secular home. They just didn't like any form of religion, observance. But in my grandparents' home, I found some sort of, I don't know if it was a prayer book or what it was, and I came upon this psalm, and I found it so comforting that as a child, I memorized it. Wow. I just sat there line by line and I memorized it. And to this day, if I go to the doctor, if I go to the dentist, if I'm really worried, this is what I say in my head.
Beautiful. How beautiful that is.
Rabbi, if I could share something that was in this week's New Yorker that just popped out on our discussion. This is by Louis Menand, who I think is just our age, and he's talking about his upbringing. He's talking about many things, but he says, we tend to teach civics to school children, but when I was in school in a relatively enlightened state, in an enlightened area, we had to recite every morning the Pledge of Allegiance, the Lord's Prayer, and Psalm 23 in his grade school classroom.
Amazing. And some of you said you did too, which I had never
middle
heard
school,
of.
They recited the Gettysburg Address. Betsy Immershon for the last question of the day, perhaps.
So I find, I love this note 5 that he's speaking about hope for his born days, because when I read, and it's true in some of the prayers too, but when I read this, my life he brings back. It's so, he leads me in paths of justice. It's so hopeful to me in terms of the internal sense of how we can survive pain and keep living on. And through an incredibly painful period of my life a long time ago, it was such a sense, I felt like my prayer really brought me back to being alive again. And this line, it's like, it just, to me, it sounds that so beautifully in terms of right now, here and now, not just thinking about what happens next in terms of afterlife or with death, which some of this you could feel, but to me, it's so much about how this connection brings life to us.
Beautiful, beautiful, Betsy. Thank you. All right, we're about to end, and I've asked Harold to share a photo I took this week when I was in Israel that I want to share with everybody to end this class. I was in the Knesset on Monday or Tuesday, meeting with many people who are now going to be in the government. And this is the famous Chagall paintings that are in the Knesset, which there's a lot to say about them altogether. But this is the very, 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 very famous painting that Chagall did of King David. And so I thought it would be interesting to show you this, and you'll see there's David, a pretty young man, not the teenager, but not the old man. And there he is. You can see him holding Chagall's image of the lute, or whatever the stringed instrument, or what did we decide it was? Not a lute, a lyre, right? Is that what it is?
There isn't agreement.
There isn't agreement. Okay, but you can see it. So I thought this was just a beautiful image. So I took this photograph thinking of all of you while I was in Jerusalem. And this is at the Knesset, at the main entrance. And those of you who have been with me at the Knesset, there are these huge, huge panels of the Chagall paintings of Jewish history. And this is the image of David. So it's a pretty special, and I love the image of David that's used here is not of the military leader, but of the singer of Psalms and of the musician and of the lyre-like. Okay. So I just wanted to end today offering this image of
And
David.
that's Yerushalayim, right, on the upper, the text right up here?
Yes, yes, it says Yerushalayim up there, and it's a huge panel. I could only get, it goes through all of Jewish history, but this, yes, this is with David with his lyre-like instrument.
So do we have a big show this Friday, Rabbi, since this is our last
Yeah,
class?
so first of all, Friday night, we have a fabulous speaker, one of the young, they used to be ultra-Orthodox, now a trans rabbinical student who's going to be our guest speaker. And Zevi is also going to be helping to lead the music Friday night. And then if you haven't gotten a ticket, and there's really no financial barrier, please make sure you get something for the concert on Sunday. The chorus is featured, Zevi, Sam Rosen, Sally Wilford, Adria's string quartet. It's going to be a big shoe, a really big shoe, a really big shoe. So I don't know if everybody has access. Will it be recorded? I assume so. But please sign up for it and you'll get the link. I assume it's on the CBSE website, right? And we've been sending it out.
It's all over.
It's all over. Okay.
Jeremy had his hand up. Jeremy, you had one last question.
And the Chagall, who is the woman standing, who is the female figure standing behind David?
I have to look at the picture again.
And you know, Rabbi,
looks like a bride.
I went to the website, and these are actually tapestries, I think.
Yes, actually, they're tapestries. Right. Sorry about that. Yes, they're tapestries. Super, super, super famous. I don't know who we'd have to look at the explanations. Do you want to put maybe
I'm
Harold,
putting it in the Facebook page right now.
So we could look it up. I don't know who the woman is. We'll see there's a lot written about every image, and they're huge, huge, huge. Anyway, really wonderful art. And I just love that image of David to share with all of you.
All right, thank you. Shabbat shalom to everybody.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Back here on Monday. See you at the Shabbat services and see you at the concert.
Shabbat shalom.